Kurt.
Morning.
How's everyone doing today? Great. Normally, I'm a little bit more sprightly, but Christmas Eve, sitting on the floor, building castles and train tables, because that's what, daddies do on Christmas Eve. And somehow, managed to hurt my back. So, today I'm going to sit. I'm not quite my squirrely, sprightly self as normal, but bear with me and we'll go forward. I hope that you all had a good holiday that has gone well. You got to see friends and family and spend good time with them. Last week we talked about feelings of insignificance and how God throughout the Bible used people who and places and things that from the outside looked very insignificant. How we would look at people and places and things that God used and said, oh well, what are they going to do? What's God going to do with this? Well, today I want to talk about ending strong. I want to talk more about what that looks like as we get towards the end of our time, and how God can use us when we trust Him regardless of what's going on. I do find it kind of amusing that this week of all weeks is when I hurt my back, since I'm using Samson as an example. But while Samson was one of the strongest men to ever live, I'm about as tough as a baby kitten right now. But I'm on the mend. Things are getting better. You can ask Claire. She was over at our house on Friday. I literally felt like I was about to break in half. But things are better now. We're moving up. I went to the chiropractor, started to get fixed, all that good stuff. Sometimes we get fearful or concerned or worried that we are not strong enough for what lies ahead. Just yesterday, I took the boys to McDonald's, kind of get them out of the house, let them go and play in the play place and run around for a while. They can't jump on me, so go jump on something else. And so while we're going there, I was a little bit worried that if something happened or someone got stuck in the play place, that I literally would not be strong enough to go in and get them, go in and save them. If you've ever had a child get stuck and you've had to crawl through those play places as an adult, it's kind of hard when you're well. They're not built for people over 3 feet high. But sometimes we feel either weak or scared or tired, or that we're just not good enough. Sometimes we wake up in the morning saying, I just can't. I can't today. Going back to bed. This can come in a lot of different forms. And it can have a lot of different causes. Sometimes it's a sin that we become mired in, that we just can't seem to crawl out of. Sometimes it's sickness or ailment or physical pain. You ask anyone who knows me very well at all, I don't do nothing well. So when I have to just lay on the couch and do nothing, I don't handle that really great. My dad, my grandfathers were all the same way. We don't just do nothing well. Sometimes it can come just from a feeling of hopelessness. There are disorders like depression and other things that people have to deal with. And all these are very valid reasons to feel weak. We're human. We're not perfect. We're human beings who live in a fallen world. And as a consequence of being in that fallen world, we have to deal with all of these things. And so today I want us to deal with it. And I want us to deal with it by realizing and understanding that it's not our power that we're living on. It's not our power that we're relying on. It's God. And it's only when we are relying on His power that we can start to pull out of all of these things. So today I want us to remember that God can use us regardless of the situation that we find ourselves in. Even if it's a situation of our own doing, God can still use us where we are. I want to be very clear. There is no thing and there is no person that God cannot make useful, or that He will not use for His glory, if they turn to and rely on Him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul is writing about a problem that he faced. And we don't know what it was. There's lots of speculation out there. But there was an issue that Paul faced. And in 2 Corinthians 12, starting in verse 7, he writes, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Now Paul's not saying he's strong when he's weak because of what he can do. He's saying he's strong when he's weak because of what Christ can do. And Paul the Apostle, the man who met Christ on the road to Damascus, who planted churches across the known world, who the Apostle, one of the men who, direct line, is literally begging God to take this away from him. Saying, I can't deal with it. This is buffeting me. If you don't, to give you a word picture of what buffeting is, the same term is used when Paul is shipwrecked, and how the waves were buffeting the ship and breaking it apart, literally tearing the boat he was on apart. And he says this thorn was buffeting him. He said, I begged that it would be taken away. But Christ had other plans. What does it have to do with Samson? Well, Samson was a man, and he was a strong man, but he had some weaknesses as well. Most of you here are very familiar with the life of Samson. It's one of the things that we teach and talk about from when we were little kids. It's up there with the stories of Moses and the 10 Commandments and the plagues. It's up there with David and Goliath. It's taught just as often. It's kind of just one of those big stories that kids think are neat and cool and they want to know about, so we teach it. But we always seem to end with the story of Samson and Delilah. And then after that, then after that, they gouge out his eyes and put him in slaves, and they take him to the temple, and he tears it down, and that's the end. But we don't look at that quite as deeply as I believe that we need to. You see, we rarely really explore what this means for our lives today. And this is something that we need to remember in reading the Old Testament, is that many of the things, many of the lessons learned from it are very, very relevant to our lives today. Now, Samson comes on the scene when Israel is under Philistine oppression. And Israel really dug their own grave on this one. They turned away from God. They stopped listening to Him. They stopped following Him. And to wake them up, God had to put them under their enemies. And they repeat this cycle. We talked about this last week. How over and over and over they turn from God, and they stay turned away until God sends in someone to oppress them, to wake them up to the fact that they need to turn back to Him. You have to take them down a few pegs. Sometimes He has to do that with us as well. When we stop listening, when we refuse to follow Him, sometimes He has to take us down a couple notches to wake us up. But He doesn't do this out of vengeance or anger or throwing a fit. This isn't God arbitrarily doing these things just to do them. He does it out of love. In Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 7, we read, "If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but He for our profit, that we may be partakers of His holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." We do want to be children of God, yes? If we truly want to be children of God, then we must accept the things that make us happy, as well as the things that don't make us happy at the moment, correct? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say that every bad thing that ever happens to anyone is God punishing them. We live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. But there are times where God will use that bad things to help wake us up to where we need to be. My boys know two very solid facts about our relationship. The first fact is Danielle and I love them unconditionally. There are no preconditions on our love for them, and we love them greatly. There is nothing that I can think of, and I've tried to think of it. There is nothing that they could do that would cause me to stop loving them. They know this as a fact of life. Our love is unconditional. They are our children. It is unconditional. The second fact they know is that if I go 1 in my daddy voice, something bad will happen if I keep counting. It doesn't matter what's going on. They can be screaming and running around. They can be playing. They can be having an all-out brawl. If I go 1, Hayden immediately, yes, sir. Liam's a little more stubborn. He's still learning this. Usually with him, I get to 2. Because you don't want me to get to 3. Because that's when it's over. You who are parents, if you've ever done this, you've seen it. Bad things happen when I get to 3. God doesn't automatically just bring the hammer down on Israel here. He gives them chances. He gives them warnings. And just like my children, when 3 comes, it's time to take action. And so action has been taken against Israel, and they're under the Philistines. And so they realize that they've gone astray, realize that they're on the wrong path, and so they turn to God and they cry out for a deliverer. And this is where Samson comes in. God uses Samson in big, impressive ways. These are the stories that we grew up with as kids. You know, he kills a lion barehanded. He ransacks a town because they cheated on his riddle. He literally goes to a city and rips the gates off of their wall and carries them off. It's a little bit lesser known story. I didn't realize that till later. But this isn't like a picket fence on a house. These walls are meant for protecting a city. And Samson just goes and rips off the gates and carries them off. Hey, look, guys, where's the gate going and who's carrying that? We see him kill 1,000 enemies with a donkey's jawbone. I'm surprised his jawbone lasted that long. I think one of my favorite stories, I don't know why, I just find it funny, is the Philistines do something to Samson, so he catches a bunch of foxes. I don't know where he found all these foxes, but he found them. And he ties their tails together in pairs, takes a torch, puts it in the middle of the tie, and then lets them run through the Philistine fields and burns all their farmlands to the ground. I don't know why, but somehow just the image of hundreds of foxes running through fields and burning them, just like, why? But all these stories are big, impressive things that we know. But there's another side to Samson that we don't really think about. See, in Judges 16, verse 31, this is after Samson has pulled the temple down and died. In verse 31, we read, "And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years." Now I'm just, doing a little fuzzy math here, but the first wives and foxes ripping off the gate, Samson and Delilah pulling down the temple. I don't necessarily see 20 years in these stories. See, Samson was a judge. Samson was a leader of Israel. He was a leader of God's people. He was someone who God placed in a position of trust to lead those he called his own. Now, he was a human and he made some mistakes. And some of those mistakes cost him dearly. But he was human and he did some things that he was not to do. He was born a Nazirite, and Nazirites were set apart for God. Now, in Old Testament law, you could become a Nazirite for a certain amount of time, basically separate yourself to God for a spiritual purpose. But before Samson is born, his parents are told, this child will be a Nazirite, and he will be one from birth. Now, Nazirites were under very strict rules. There were certain things they could do and certain things they absolutely could not do. They were set apart for God. But Samson's a human, and humans make mistakes. So after he kills the lion, he comes back later and scoops some honey out of it where some bees had made a nest. Well, under Jewish law, you don't go and scoop stuff out of dead things to eat. That's unclean. Then he turns around and gives it to his parents. So not only has he done something unclean, he causes his parents to be unclean because he lies by omission. Because he doesn't tell them where the honey came from. He's like, here, have some honey. He's not perfect. We see this how he gives in the end to Delilah and tells the secret of his strength. I'm sure he knew this was not a wise decision. But this is a big mistake that we all know about. And it was a big mistake. Because after he tells her, they come in, they gouge out his eyes, they put him in a slave mill. But it says his hair begins to grow. And then he brings down the temple. And this bringing down of the Philistine temple is not just a side note. Because it not only tells us the way that he died, but it tells us how he died as well. And those are two different things. Knowing the way someone dies is different from knowing how they die. And this is what I mean in verse 28 of Judges chapter 16. It says, Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson died faithfully. He made a big mistake that cost him dearly, but he ended strong. He ended faithfully. So we always think of Samson starting out physically strong and physically doing all these great deeds, and then he messed up and he died. That wasn't the end of the story. That's not the end of his story. And it's not the end of our story either. See, God views Samson, even in his weakness, even in his failure, he views Samson. And in Hebrews chapter 11, at the very end, Samson is included in this list of great heroes of faith. And the writer of Hebrews, after talking about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses, talking about all these great, huge pillars of faith in the Old Testament. In verse 32 he says, But what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. These are the people that Samson is keeping company with in the book of Hebrews. The prophets who warned God's people to turn back to him. To David, the great king. To Samuel, the one who God used to anoint him. You see, starting strong is good. Starting strong is something we should hope that we can do. But if Samson had started strong and ended walking away from God, well, I wouldn't really be talking about him today. Starting strong is good. Ending strong is better. See, it's not our strength that makes us strong. It's not our strength and our endurance and our go get it that will enable us to last as long as we need to last. It's God who works in us. As we go into a new year, we like to make New Year's resolutions and make goals and plans and all these other things. We like to get off on the right foot and get moving so we can get moving forward. But so often within the first couple weeks or first couple of months, well, bombed that resolution. I guess I'll try again next year. Been there lots of times. I don't even make New Year's resolutions anymore. I try to make my resolutions like March, June, October. So sometime different, just so. But the only way that we end strong, regardless of how much we struggle at the start, regardless of how much we stumble and trip and become awkward in the middle, the only way that we end strong is with Christ. And that's regardless of what we face now. We like to think of ourselves as beginning things and ending things. The only one who really begins and ends anything is the one who begins and ends everything. And when we rely on Him, when we come to Him, when we give it over to Him, we can start moving forward in the things that we struggle with here. And sometimes we need encouragement from others. Sometimes we need prayer from individuals in the church. Sometimes we need to let everyone know what we're struggling with so we can get it out there and begin moving on it. Because when we take it and we bury it down and we say, no, I'm great, I'm strong, I can do this, don't worry about it, we find ourselves becoming weaker and weaker and weaker until we're in shambles. I could have sat here and pretended that my back was fine and I might have ended up collapsing. Don't wait until you're collapsing to ask for help, to ask for prayers, to turn to God. Now's the time. Not waiting till the new year, which is only a few days away, not waiting till we feel better. Oh, when I feel better, then I'll let people know. No. The time is now. To ask for prayers, to ask for encouragement, to come and become Christ so that He can pull you onto the path and help you end strong. So if anyone can help you do that, won't you let us or someone know